Welcome to Section 2.2, Part 2. This is the 14th session of the CISSP exam prep series. This part continues our walk through risk management, moving into assessment and analysis. In this session, we'll dig into how risk is actually assessed. We'll answer several questions. Who owns risk management? What is the difference between prudent and reasonable action? Why does scope matter so much? How do qualitative and quantitative analysis differ? And how do the quantitative formulas fit together? Why does this matter beyond the exam? Because sooner or later you will stand in front of leadership and justify a security spend. Picture a payment processor weighing a fraud detection upgrade against a data center generator. If you can put credible numbers and clear judgment behind each risk, the decision becomes defensible. If you cannot, you are asking executives to fund a hunch. These methods turn instinct into evidence. Who actually owns risk management? Upper management does. They initiate and support the effort by defining its scope and purpose, and they make the final call on which responses get implemented. The heavy lifting, the analysis and response modeling, is usually delegated to a team from the security and information technology departments who submit a proposal. But every result and decision must be understood and approved at the top. That approval is a core part of demonstrating due care. Leadership cannot outsource ownership of risk. What separates prudent action from reasonable action? The standard of care each one sets. Reasonable action is what an ordinary, sensible person would do in the same situation. It is the baseline, the threshold that shows you met your duty of care. Prudent action goes further, marks by extra caution, foresight, and precautions beyond the ordinary. Think of two drivers in fog. The reasonable one slows down, the prudent one slows down, turns on hazard lights, and increases following distance. In court, prudent choices offer stronger protection when a higher standard is expected. Why does scope matter so much? Because it draws the boundary around the whole effort. Scope defines what is included and what is excluded from a risk assessment. A clear scope lets an organization focus limited resources where they matter, avoid ambiguity, and get everyone aligned on the objectives. Remember too that no environment is ever fully risk-free. Management decides which risks are acceptable, and that judgment depends on budget, expertise, and business conditions. Risk is deeply personal to each organization. Losing a modest sum devastates one company and barely registers for another. How do qualitative and quantitative analysis differ? By whether they use numbers or judgment. Quantitative analysis assigns real dollar figures through mathematical calculation, producing hard values for loss and countermeasure cost. Qualitative analysis assigns subjective ratings based on perception, experience, and intuition. Neither alone gives the full picture, so most organizations blend them into a hybrid. Picture two ways to judge a risky bridge. One measures the exact load it can bear, the other asks seasoned engineers how safe it feels. You want both answers before you cross. How does qualitative analysis work in practice? Through structured, scenario-based judgment. Instead of exact dollars, you rank threats on a relative scale using group techniques like brainstorming, surveys, checklists, focus groups, and scenarios. A scenario is a short written description of a single major threat and the safeguards that might blunt it, and participants rate its threat level and loss potential. The value grows as you include more people from every level and department. A simple 3x3 grid of probability against damage is the lightest form. Larger grids add precision but demand far more time and research. What makes the Delphi technique special? It strips away bias by keeping responses anonymous. The Delphi technique gathers participants, often in one room, and collects each person's feedback privately, on paper or through digital messaging. Results are compiled, shared back to the group, and the cycle repeats until they reach consensus. Because no one knows who said what, ideas get judged on merit rather than on the rank or reputation of the person proposing them. Picture a design review where the quietest junior analyst's idea carries the same weight as the chief architect's. That is the whole point. How does quantitative analysis begin? With asset value and the exposure factor, you inventory assets and assign each a dollar value. Then pair every asset with its possible threats. For each pairing, you calculate the exposure factor, the percentage of the asset you would lose if that threat were realized. A realized threat rarely destroys an asset completely. The exposure factor is small for easily replaced hardware and large for irreplaceable things like proprietary designs. Picture a flood reaching a ground floor server room and damaging 40% of the equipment. That 40% is your exposure factor. How do you turn that into a single loss figure? With the single loss expectancy. The single loss expectancy is the loss from one realized threat against one asset, and it equals asset value times exposure factor. If a customer database is worth $200,000 and a specific threat carries an exposure factor of 45%, then a single loss expectancy is $90,000. You will not always need to calculate it separately because the annual figure usually matters more, but it is the natural stepping stone from valuation toward yearly loss. How do you express loss across a whole year? By adding frequency to the picture. The annualized rate of occurrence is how often you expect a threat to be realized in a single year. It ranges from 0, meaning never, up to very large numbers for frequent events. An earthquake in a quiet inland town might carry a rate near 0, while malicious email in a busy office could number in the millions. The annualized loss expectancy then combines everything. It is single loss expectancy times the annualized rate of occurrence, or equivalently, asset value times exposure factor times that rate. If a single loss expectancy is $90,000 and the rate is 1/2, the annual loss expectancy is $45,000. How does all this drive real decisions? By ranking your risks in dollars. Once you have an annual loss expectancy for every asset threat pairing, you sort them from largest to smallest. The number is not a literal prediction of loss, but it has real relative value. The largest annual loss expectancy is your biggest problem and the first risk you address in response. Software tools make this practical, generating asset inventories, applying rates, and producing standardized reports. Picture a spreadsheet of risks sorting itself top to bottom, telling you exactly where to start. So let's bring it together. Upper management owns risk and defines scope, while a team does the analysis. Prudent action exceeds the reasonable baseline when a higher standard applies. Qualitative analysis ranks risk through judgment and techniques like scenarios and the Delphi method, while quantitative analysis puts dollars on it. Exposure factor, single loss expectancy, annualized rate of occurrence, and annualized loss expectancy chain together. And sorting by annual loss expectancy tells you where to begin. The MCQs covering all the topics and concepts from this session are available on rucloud.com. Practice the chapter-specific MCQs before moving on to the next session. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below or email us. I will see you in the next session.